But the only ones who are truly bad, like really unpleasantly not nice, Van Morrison, who um, we befriended at a time when he was really down in the dumps in Montreux. But subsequently, he's really snubbed me I've found all it takes is just to say, oh, hi, and then go on your way. But he just snubbed me in a not nice way.
Okay, Jethro Tull are releasing a deluxe edition of Living in the Past, now retitled Still Living in the Past. This is available on the 11th of July. There is a purchasing link just below this video. It's also available as a 2 vinyl set. I urge you to check this out. I was going to ask you, interestingly, in 1968, The Who released the album The Who Sell Out, which is an interesting polemic on the tension between do artists create art or do they just create mere product?
Hmm.
Is this something that you've mulled on over the years?
Well, the Who, I mean, right from the very beginning, they really managed to do both,
Yeah.
because there's no doubt about it. When you look at the very earliest Who tracks, of live performances or lip sync performances of the very earliest hit singles, I mean, they really did combine a manic artistry
Mhm.
with something that was incredibly catchy and popular. And some music, it can be direct, it can be um, appealing to the masses, but it's not trivial as music. It has great weight and strength to it, and it's the Who definitely have managed at all times to combine the creative and more esoteric approach with a blatant ability to hammer home the message with songs that were, particularly in the USA, were incredibly popular during the 70s, and the Who were in their heyday performing in the States on the circuit of
Mhm.
arenas and stadia. Yeah, well, nothing wrong with combining the two, and if you in an ideal world, that's what you can do. But it's not always an ideal world, so I would possibly eschew trying to write or create catchy things, popular, easy on the ear pieces in favor of just trying to be a little bit more creative in a more idiosyncratic fashion that isn't necessarily going to appeal to everybody or even most people. So I think that would probably sum me up. Is I don't write popular music. I write, broadly speaking, unpopular music.
Mhm.
If you are talking about the tender sensitivities of the average punter's ears, then I'm not a popular music artist.
But did not the writing of Bungle in the Jungle cause you some
Yeah, well, that's
anxiety?
the problem, you see, with things like Bungle in the Jungle or even Living in the Past, which
Mhm.
was done almost as a throwaway bit of fun.
Mhm.
Bungle in the Jungle was a bit more insidious because I did really try to write a piece of music that was going to be catchy, and and with Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die. I mean that also, it was a chorus that Bungle in the Jungle and Too Old to Rock and Roll both had that sort of that chorus that I suppose made them get a lot of radio play, particularly in the USA, where getting radio play really mattered when it came to promote a new album. So I did allow myself to do that, but the end result is, whilst I listen to those songs today and I think, oh yeah, that's quite clever, that's quite nice, but it quickly, on a second listening, begins to irritate me because I can see what I'm doing. I can see why. I remember why I did that. What was the musical motivation to come up with those lines lyrically and musically is to
Mhm.
sound um, attractive to people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
many of the greatest bands have managed to do that, but be creative at the same time. I mean, Led Zeppelin the Rolling Stones. I mean, they managed to come up with really catchy riffs and catchy ideas, which don't just slip into that tawdry world of pop tinsel.
Mhm. Well, talking about this box set, there's the Live at the Carnegie Hall. It's a fantastic concert on here. I was always curious. I mean, in the 1970, I think 70, The Who released Live at Leeds. Deep Purple released Made in Japan in 72, I think. Yes released live albums. Why did it take 10 years for Tull to put out a live album? Did you not
Well,
like them or
the
generally?
Living
Or?
in the Past album came out in 1972, right on the
Yeah.
heels of Thick as a Brick, as far as I recall. Or was it just before Thick as a Brick? It was
Just
within a
after
few
Fix the
months of
Brick.
Thick as a Brick, for sure. And it was at that point, I think it was something that Prime was driven, in our case, by being part of a record contract agreement,
Mm.
not really so much between us and Chrysalis, but between Chrysalis and Warner Brothers in the USA, who were the marketing distributing entity behind Chrysalis Records in its earliest days. And so the deal was, I think, for three studio albums and one live album,
Mhm.
or live album or compilation album or whatever. So I think it was part of the get out of a contract to do that. And the same tactic was employed a bit later on, actually, with the album um, MU, I
Yeah.
think, which was to renegotiate, or in the case of Chrysalis, when they were going about their own expansion and doing their own um, manufacturing, marketing, and promotion, rather than being in in a relationship with a major. They became briefly a major record company in their own right, and wanted to do all that themselves to make another slice of the profitable pie. So I think those were the reasons in the case of Jethro Tull, but who knows? I can't comment on any other bands and whether there was a similar rationale behind doing a live album or a compilation that it may because it was pretty standard, I think, in those days that record companies wanted a three album deal plus a compilation and or a live album or both.
Yeah.
That just became the norm, I think, for a while.
Yeah. I have just one more question for you, really, and that is I was going to prod you about the Under Wraps project. Can you spill any beans on what's happening there, or is it all under wraps, so to speak?
Well, it is under wraps, but it is something that's going ahead, and it was always one of those albums that I felt, from my own personal point of view, I pushed myself really to the limits of my vocal ability,
Hmm.
to my detriment, as it turned out in the next year or so. But I really damaged my vocal cords. Not so much making the record, because in the studio, you only have to sing it once or twice and
Yeah.
push yourself to the limit. But on stage, given the in the context of a 2 hour concert, it becomes, there's no room to breathe. In some places, it was a very hard album to perform live on stage, and I I did feel, though, at the time that I had sung it really well.
Yeah.
It was Peter Vitesse, the keyboard player. Some of the elements of the sounds and things going on are perhaps indicative of his interest in keyboard electronica, which was evolving from what had been before into the 80s world of synthesizers, which were much more sophisticated, and the beginning of sampling, which had
Yeah.
begun by then. So we were using those studio tricks, and some of the music I felt we did actually try to record a couple of pieces with one of the relatively well-known session drummers who's still around today, so I won't mention his name, but it was we did go into the studio and record a couple of things, and it it's not that what he played was not good. It just didn't quite fit the song as well as the drum machine, which was relentless and simplistic
Mhm.
in its tonal quality and repetitiveness. But it had a certain attraction about it, which I don't feel that at that point the live drums managed to replicate. Um, so we didn't use the live recording by the relatively famous drummer. And I as we didn't, Don Perry joined the band actually just after we released that album, and
Mhm.
he um, he probably he could have played it all, but I didn't know Don at that point. And Jerry Conway, who'd been the drummer prior to that, it wasn't really his cup of tea. Jerry was a folk rock drummer,
Mhm.
and he played kind of rock music on the album Broadsword and the Beast,
Mhm.
and which he did really well, but he wasn't very good at remembering complicated arrangements and tempo changes and things. It wasn't really in his heart and soul. Jerry liked, things that were a groove. And
Yeah.
that was the appeal of Jerry Conway for me, was as a drummer of Cat Stevens, who I greatly admired as a singer-songwriter in the early 70s. Um, Jerry was the right guy on Broadsword and the Beast, but he wouldn't have been the right guy on Underwraps. And so um, and as I say, I didn't know Doan at that point, and only a few months later did Doan come and um, do an audition. Um, so it was, it was some always my thought that maybe we could replace those original drum machine parts with something better, and that's what we are trying to do.
Mhm.
Um, and in the course of doing the remixing, it will be the original mixes, the original stereo mixes that I did, and the surround sound mixes and Dolby Atmos mixes and all that stuff that goes with it. There is, however, no more material because that was the entirety of the music that was recorded. But there are 15 tracks
Mhm.
because back then on the vinyl version there were only 12 tracks, I think, but on the cassette version there were 15 tracks, all the tracks we'd recorded. And so, of course, the 15 tracks will be on the new versions, except again, unless they do a double vinyl, it won't all fit on one vinyl pressing.
Mhm.
So that it is underway.
Yeah.
It won't be this year, but it will be next year as a release, I think, following on from the Still Living in the Past album.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of life in all these things, and then which begs the question of what about Crest of a Knave,
Oh,
because that
yes.
one.
Yes.
Um, the multi-tracks exist for that. And again, it uses a drum machine on some of the tracks, and some of them are live drums. But it was a biggie in the USA, largely because of radio play we got from a couple of tracks. And in the early days, it was a video because it was the earliest days of MTV, when
Yeah.
MTV was so desperate for programming, they'd even play Jethro Tull
Yeah.
if we delivered a video to them. So, the Crest of a Knave album, I guess, might be something that might crop up in 2027 or 2028. We'll see.
You'll have to send a copy to the Metallica boys and say this is what a Grammy-winning album looks like.
Well, the Metallica boys did have a sense of humor about it because, you know, in a way, it was rather good for them, I think, to have to wait another year to win a Grammy. And I always said at the time, I said, "Oh, don't worry, they'll win a Grammy next year for whatever." And indeed they did, and they did an acceptance speech, which they went to press and to media, thanking their record company, their wives, their girlfriends, the family dog, and Jethro Tull for not bringing out a new album this year, which I thought was quite funny, for the heaviest of metal bands. But the
Indeed.
guitar player in Metallica,
Kirk Hammett.
yeah, he's apparently was and is a Jethro Tull fan.
Mhm.
He tried to get in touch with me um, last year sometime, but via my son, and and I think I wrote back to him but I didn't get a reply or a response, so maybe it went to spam.
Mm,
But I thanked him for his interest and whatever, and not bringing out a new Metallica album.
exactly. Exactly.
But anyway, no, the Metallica boy, I have yet to meet, apart from Chuck Berry, Van Morrison, um, one other person who's escapes me at the moment, who snubbed me. I've yet to meet anybody who wasn't actually a nice person and had a warmth and a humor about them. All the bad guys in rock and roll, and some of them are, my pals. I mean, the baddest people in pop and rock. They turn out to be really nice guys and fun guys, even though perhaps their exterior, Richie Blackmore, perfect gentleman, nice guy.
Mm,
And, lots of them like that, that they're very, they don't live up to the bad PR reputation with which they have been both blessed and cursed,
mhm,
but obviously helps in a way maintain their credibility as bad boys. But the only ones who are truly bad, like really unpleasantly not nice, Van Morrison, who we befriended at a time when he was really down in the dumps in Montreux. And my wife cooked dinner for him and his girlfriend because he was really in a depressed state about his career and his future and whatever. And we were all nice to him, and wasn't exactly fun and a joy to be with, but he was okay. But subsequently, he's really snubbed me I've found and all it takes is just to say, oh, hi, and then go on your way. But he just snubbed me in a not nice way. And that's happened to me two or three times
mm.
only in
Well,
all of my musical life. Most of the time, the all the bad boys turn out to be usually pretty good boys. At least with me, they're always very polite. And all of Emerson, Lake and Palmer had terrible reputations. All really nice guys, and when they were on tour with us, they were happy bunnies. Apart from
Van Morrison snubbing, if you might speak
yeah,
more
well,
about him than you,
between
I
Van
suspect.
Morrison and Bob Dylan, and one or two American artists who I won't mention. My wife, as tour accountant in the USA, gets all the dirt from the US promoters, and so sometimes when we get back to the hotel, she says, "Oh, you won't believe what promoter X was saying about artist Y,"
Yeah.
because the tales are sometimes just almost unbelievable in terms of really, could somebody really do that or
Mm,
demand that or whatever? I mean, it is quite amusing, the world that we live in
well,
terms of bad behavior. But
well,
I don't witness it. For some reason, people are always, usually anyway, polite and nice around me, and sometimes unlikely people that don't come from my musical world. Mark Almond is a big buddy, and
mhm,
he was one of the very bad boys in pop
mhm,
music back in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean,
mhm.
the stories about Mark are just, well, unbelievable, which he says, oh, well, they're usually exaggerated. He said, I didn't really do that.
Well, Van Morrison,
Hugh Cornwell, he's a very bad boy. Hugh
yeah,
Cornwell is a terrible man for fighting and heroin and what. I mean, Hugh's a bad boy. He's a bad boy of the so-called punk era.
yeah,
But Hugh is actually a very mild-mannered, really nice guy. And,
mhm,
from time to time we meet up. I played on a couple of his solo albums, and he's been a guest of mine at Wells Cathedral, comes to mind. And yeah, I mean, a lot of the bad boys actually in real life, they turn out to be, they're very mild-mannered, nice people. But perhaps in later life, maybe it's something they grew out of. But I
well,
suspect that Hugh Cornwell probably would have been a nice guy to me, at least back in the heyday of the Stranglers when I bought their first album,
Restless
Ratus
Novegicus is,
Norvegicus, which
yeah,
was about 74 or
So,
something, was it?
oh, I think it was a bit later. What about 77, wasn't it, or something?
Was
Or
it? Well, it was sometime I remember being in the studio recording one of our albums, and I I bought two records by people that I didn't think I would like. Well, three actually. I got an album by the Sex Pistols, one by the Stranglers, and what was the third one I bought?
Clash.
No. It wasn't. It wasn't another of the so-called punk bands. It was just something. Oh, it was Roxy Music,
Okay.
who were in that kind of very camp sort of thing. And I must have let it be known that I really, I liked Roxy Music in that first album they had, and as a result of which they ended up being on not on tour, but playing with us at Madison Square Gardens because they so the word must have got around that I like Roxy Music, and so they got put on the as the opening act in Madison Square Gardens, which was a near disaster. I mean, it was our audience hated them with a deep, abiding passion,
Yes, as did Whispering Bob Harris.
especially the preening Eno,
Yeah.
all his feathers and things. You could just sense the animosity, the thing from the audience. Anyway, yeah, but bless them, they were they were one of my favorite pop groups at the time.
I like the early stuff of Eno, especially. Um, I mean, Van Morrison's got a reputation for being unpleasant generally. Or what went down with you and Chuck Berry out of interest? How did he
Well,
snub you?
nothing at all. I just went over to say hello to him. It was a festival somewhere, and he was sitting in an open top Mercedes, which apparently he had demanded from the promoter would pick him up at the airport and bring him to the gig. And he was sitting in this, I think it was red. Miles Davis was another one of these guys who would insist on a particular brand of car. I think in this case it was a Ferrari. Had to pick him up at Geneva Airport to bring him to the Montreux Jazz Festival. And the promoters, of course, would agree to these
Mm.
things, in order to get the artist there. Anyway, Chuck Berry was sitting in his car, having refused to go to a dressing room. He just sat in the car until it was his turn to go on stage, and then drove away straight away afterwards. And I saw him, and I just wanted to say hi, literally just to say hello, Mr. Berry. I'm also playing at the festival, and great to see you here. And used to hear your music when I was teenager and starting playing, and whatever I would have said, I didn't get the chance to say it because he just gave me a cold look and turned away, and so he didn't react and say anything, just turned away. Hello, Mr. Berry. Slunk away into the
Well,
back to
Bob
where.
Dylan's a friendly chap, apparently. Did you meet him?
No, I never met Bob Dylan. No, no.
Mhm. Well, I think he was.
I think with Chuck Berry, he genuinely was a pretty unfriendly guy to most people, and Van
I think
Morrison's
so.
unfriendly even to members of his own band. I mean, he's a notoriously disgruntled, angry person.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can't help but feel that he's angry with himself for something. There's something weird about Van Morrison, and he's certainly the only time I did interact with him back in Montreux in whenever it was, about 73, 74. He seemed in a state of real depression, I mean, damaged psyche. And yet he was still close to the peak of his acceptance, particularly in the USA, where he was a big star. But
Mhm.
something wasn't right, and he was a lost soul.
Yeah.
Um, but Yeah, some people are like that, and I dare say before I let you go that I'm sure there are people who could deliver similar stories about me. So I shouldn't forget the fact that if somebody approaches me at the wrong moment at the wrong time, I may not be in a particularly friendly mood to
Mm.
have to do a selfie or shake hands with somebody or do whatever. I try to tell myself rise above it and just it doesn't cost me anything to just say Oh, hi. Yeah, nice to see you. Great. Thanks for coming to the show or whatever it is. I mean, I try to do that, but I'm sure there are times when I've failed to be either failed to be convincing or failed to do it at all. So there are probably some people who could say similar things about me being a bit of an unfriendly, standoffish kind of a person.
Well,
But
I think you said in the liner notes to Crest to a Knave when it was reissued as a CD that, quote, I'm a bit of a bugger.
I can't remember. But yes, I'm. If I'm talking about myself, then
Mm,
yes, I am. I'm I have been most of my life a bit of a loner. I'm used to
mhm.
being on my own. I like to write music on my own. I like to arrange music on my own. I really don't. It's not that I don't welcome the involvement of the band when it's time to unveil everything to them and say, okay, here we are. Now it's your turn to come up with some um, mutual participation in all of this and come up with your interpretation, your ideas in terms of what you play. But I couldn't write music with somebody. I just find I could never, for instance, it would never have been a songwriting partnership for me to have written a song with Martin Barr. I mean, he once came up with an instrumental to which I wrote some lyrics as a spoken word thing rather than a vocal because it having a melody, but a melody would have been superfluous and getting in the way of what he was playing. So I did a spoken word thing, and Martin was a bit. I think he was rather hoping that I would come up with a melody line and it would be a song, but it wouldn't work with what he played. And primarily this piece of music was about him playing guitar and coming up with an intricate piece of guitar music. But I could never have gone into a room and said, right, Martin, let's write a song together. Um, because we would have both said, well, okay, you go first. I mean, somebody has to come up with the idea, and somebody then has to follow in and modify it or change it or add to it or whatever it might be. But to me, the whole idea of going into a private space with a person and writing something together, it would be it would be easier for me to step naked in the shower with Martin Barr than to have gone into a room and written a song with him, and not just with him. I mean, with anybody, it just wouldn't. It's you're too exposed. You're too. It's such a personal and intimate situation. I just wouldn't find it possible for me anyway to do such a thing. And when I hear music that does appear to have been largely written as a partnership between Lennon and McCartney, for example, because some of the music sounds like it was pretty much all one guy, not
Mm.
the other. But the things that do appear to be a partnership, and I marvel at how they were able to sit in the room together and do that. It's a process that I can't even begin to understand. Um, even Handel, when it came to the Messiah, he he wrote all the music, and somebody else wrote all the words. Um, in isolation. It wasn't a cooperative effort, and indeed they sort of came close to falling out
Mm.
over the combination of the music and the libretto to the Messiah.
Yeah.
Um, I don't recall Beethoven ever, you know, stepping into a room with an elderly J.S. Bach saying, "Hey, come on, let's jam." It didn't. These things didn't happen. These were weird, kind of moody solo guys who could only ever write in a darkened space from a very introverted personal point of view. And
Yeah.
I think it's the same thing for me. Really, I just don't feel I can share that process with another human being.
Didn't Martin Barr, wasn't he responsible at some level of writing Driving Song?
No, I think that was actually Glenn Cornick.
Oh, okay.
Might have come up with a bass riff
Hmm.
because it was a kind of from memory. I think it was a unison bass guitar and electric guitar riff.
Mm.
No, I think that was Glenn Cornick, not Martin. But uh, and Glenn, the very the bass riff at the beginning of Living in the Past, that was his contribution.
Mhm.
Um, I mean the song was written, the melody and the vocals, I mean everything. But I said, we'll start it off with just the bass guitar and a hi hat or whatever it was right at the beginning, or claves or something, um, and he just came up with that little riff, which was an important part of the song in the sense of it being a little introductory piece.
Mhm.
I think but those are all things that come from the process of working with the guys in the band once the song is established in terms of chords, melody, and lyrics.
Mhm.
That's the song. And then these days, I would send a demo to the band. Back then, it wasn't so easy to make demos, so I would just probably go in the studio and say, "Well, this is my idea for a song." And I would play something on the acoustic guitar, and you know, quite often I didn't even sing the melody or whatever. Even if I had a melody and lyrics, I was too embarrassed to do that. I would just give them the bones of it, and then build it around their interpretation of what they were hearing.
Mhm.
But That's not quite the same as a Lennon and McCartney or a Jagger and Richards kind
Mhm.
of songwriting partnership, where it's often quite a cooperative effort, where you really do imagine the two guys sitting in a room. They weren't doing this from different cities or different countries, sending demos by you know audio file or Dropbox or whatever. I mean, back in those days, you maybe well, there probably were little cassette recorders, at least by the 70s.
Mhm.
So you could sort of press some buttons and make a little demo on a cassette. But in the earliest days, I mean, that didn't exist. So
Mhm.
quite sure the Beatles, it had to be sitting in a room together.
Yeah.
It had to be something that they really did have that intensity of relationship, and the outcome, sadly, was the intensity and the intimacy of those personal creative relationships didn't prevail in the times when personal differences came about, and the relationships broke up, and that it didn't help Lennon and McCartney ultimately.
Mhm. Mhm.
Jagger and Richards still lurch on, so it would seem, through periods of often expressed animosity or ridicule on the part of
Mhm.
Keith Richards, talking about Mick's Tadger. I mean, these are amusing anecdotes and a lot of fun, and you hope that fun is something that does prevail, still part of their relationship to this day. That they are um, very different people, but nonetheless, they must have had that experience of writing together. That's something that I've just not only not had, but have no desire to do. And
Mhm.
maybe it would be better if I'd found a songwriting partner, but I never found somebody that I wanted to do that with. I had been asked to do that by some other people, but I've just said that involves me and you getting together in a room, sitting together and doing something. I said I'm just not really cut out for that.
No, no.
Send me your rough mix, and I'll play on it or sing on it or whatever. I'm quite happy doing Engelbert,
Okay.
but not sitting down with somebody to co-write a song.
No, no. Anyway, Ian, I'll let you get off and get a cup of tea or something. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Let me just plug this box set one more time. Jethro Tull, Still Living in the Past. This wonderful, I think it's like 5 disc or 6 disc compilation will be released on the 11th of July. There was a purchasing link just below this video. Ian, thank you so much for doing this.